We know Russia interfered in that campaign. No matter what the president
This week, the House of Representatives is taking up a non-binding resolution to express a sense of the House that Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report should be made public. Before that resolution comes up on the House floor, members of the House Rules Committee meeting now to decide the rules that will govern debate of the legislation on the floor. Live coverage.
There are some indications, however, that it could be wrapping up soon. As we kick off Sunshine Week today, the committee is considering H-Con Res 24. This resolution makes clear that Congress believes the American people should have access to the final report. The American people do not want it to be stashed away or hidden somewhere. And in a recent CNN poll, 87% of the public said they think the findings of the Mueller investigation should be made public. Well, let me be clear. Moving this forward is not prejudging the investigation's outcome. We do not know if it will be critical of any individual, including the president, or not. But this is not about embarrassing President Trump. It is about ensuring the American people have the information that they deserve. Democrats have pushed for transparency, and Republicans on both sides of the Capitol have voiced support for releasing the special counsel's report, too. That includes the top 3 members of the House Republican leadership: Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Minority Whip Steve Scalise, and Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney. So this resolution is our chance to go on record, and I hope members on both sides of the aisle take this opportunity. But before we hear from our 2 distinguished witnesses, let me turn to the ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any remarks he wants to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Frankly, I don't have a lot to say about today's legislation because, frankly, in my view, it doesn't really accomplish anything. It's a non-binding resolution expressing the belief that is yet unwritten, as far as we know, an unreleased report from the special counsel's office should be made public. I'm actually more concerned with the lack of any meaningful legislation this week for us to deal with. I mean, all we're doing all week long are suspension bills and this non-binding resolution. I would hope instead we could find some things we could work on together, advance some things in a bipartisan way. On substance, again, I would just say it's premature because it's non-binding. I have no problem with it. I tend to vote for it. I've made those same calls that you mentioned other Republicans have made. The only caveat I would add is because of the sensitive nature of some of the material that's been looked at, there might be a sources and methods kind of issue that's, in my view, what the Attorney General ought to be looking at, and to make sure we don't inadvertently expose some asset or some technique that gives our opponents, the Russians, some sort of advantage in understanding how we get the information that we have. But so, I would prefer to wait until we actually had the report. But again, I certainly have no objections to calling for the release of as much of it as may be practical for people to have a look at. But I do think we're wasting a lot of time this week, and I can't figure out very much what we're doing that's substantive. So with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the gentleman's comments. I would just say that there are lots of committees that are working on very substantive pieces of legislation. And they're doing hearings on them. I mean, one of the things that we put in our House rules is that substantive bills, before they come to this committee, ought to have hearings in the committees of jurisdiction and ought to have markups. That's something that my friends on the other side didn't adhere to all the time when they were in the majority. But I assure you, the gentleman, that there is lots of substance coming down the way, some of it which I think you'll like and some of which maybe you won't like so much. But as far as this goes, I think it is important, especially if there's a strong bipartisan vote, that we go on record as saying, you know, we want transparency and we believe the American people ought to know what's been going on all this time in the Mueller investigation. I have no idea what the Mueller investigation is going to say, but I think I get concerned. I know a lot of my constituents are concerned when they hear some people talk about, you know, not making it public, or we may never know what the Mueller report says. I think after all this and after what we do know happened in the 2016 elections with Russia's interference in that election, their attack on our democracy, I think it is important, and I think it is substantive. We go on record in a bipartisan way saying, you know, let the sunshine in. So having said that, I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and we are happy to welcome the distinguished gentleman from the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Cohen, and Ranking Member Collins, who's a former member of this committee. We're delighted that you both are here. Anything you brought in writing will, without objection, be entered to the record. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Ranking Member. I am here filling in for Mr. Nadler, but I want to take an opportunity on a personal note to say this is the first time I've been to this committee since Ms. Slaughter was here, and just how wonderful a woman she was, and I miss seeing her. But she was a star.
She's watching you right now. So, so be good.
Thank you. So I appreciate your allowing us the opportunity to testify today concerning this important resolution. H. Con Res 624 expresses a sense of Congress that any report Special Counsel Mueller delivers to the Attorney General should be released to the public and to Congress. Mr. Nadler introduced this resolution along with Chairpersons Waters, Schiff, Cummings, Engel, and Neal. Releasing the report in full would be consistent with the intent of the Special Counsel regulations, past precedent, Attorney General Barr's own public statements, and most importantly, the interest of the American public. I believe President Trump has said he'd like to see it released, and to paraphrase Ronald Reagan, we paid for this report. The whole purpose of appointing a special counsel to oversee the Trump-Russia investigation in the first place was to ensure the American public would have full confidence in the integrity of the investigation. The acting Attorney General stated that Mr. Mueller was appointed, quote, in order for the American people to have full confidence in the outcome, unquote, and to assure the public that, quote, government officials administer the law fairly, unquote. The American public can only have confidence in both the process and the outcome of the investigation, however, if the Department of Justice is transparent with the investigation's results. Failing to provide a fulsome account of the Special Counsel's investigations findings would undermine the American public's confidence in the entire process and would defeat the very purpose for which the Special Counsel was appointed. Indeed, transparency is a critical aspect of the Special Counsel regulations, and releasing the report would be consistent with the overall intent of the Special Counsel regulations. The Department of Justice commentary published alongside the regulations stresses the importance of, quote, ensuring congressional and public confidence in the integrity of the process, unquote. Moreover, the report's release is supported by past precedent. In the only other instance where a special counsel was appointed under the regulations, which was in '99, concerning the 1993 confrontation in Waco, Texas, both the interim and final reports, including the findings provided by the special counsel, were released to the American public by the Attorney General. Moreover, the need for transparency is even more pronounced for investigations that involve our president. The Department of Justice policy permits disclosure of investigative materials when it serves the interests of the American public, even as they pertain to uncharged third parties. While we recognize the Department may be prohibited from publicly disclosing certain classified or grand jury information that may be contained in the report, methods and sources from intelligence world, the Department should release the Mueller report to the public to the maximum extent permitted by law and provide the report in full to Congress. It is clear that the interest of the American public is served by transparency with respect to any investigation that could implicate or exonerate our president. This is especially true given the serious allegations at the center of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. No coincidence this resolution will be considered during Sunshine Week. A vote for this resolution will send a clear signal to both the American people and the Department of Justice that Congress believes transparency is a fundamental principle necessary to ensure that government remains accountable to its people. Finally, I urge the committee to adopt Mr. Nadler's brief technical amendment, which clarifies the resolution as calling for the release of the Special Counsel's findings, as was the case with the release of reports concerning the 1993 confrontation at Waco that I previously mentioned. And I urge swift consideration of the resolution on the floor and passage by the House.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Collins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Cole. This will be short and to the point. I think this resolution is simply a restatement of the law. We're not covering any new ground here. This is not anything that my friend from Tennessee just said. I think the Attorney General has been very clear that he wants to provide the information because he understands the gravity of this. He said so in his confirmation hearing. I think as we look forward, the President is looking forward. As he said, he has done nothing wrong. I think this will follow up on that. And with that, I think it's, I mean, if this is what we need to vote on this week, then so be it. It's, I'll join my ranking member, and, you know, I know there's a lot working on. I would have loved to have had a chance to mark up H.R. 1 in judiciary. I think that would have been really good. We talked about marking up things. But as far as this goes, I'm dealing with my friend from Tennessee. You know, there'll be things I'm sure that we'll disagree on probably as we go along on what that may or may not come out. And I think the gentleman from Tennessee brought that up, the classified information, the 6E information, grand jury stuff, and, you know, investigative. We'll deal with those as they come up, but this is simply talking about a report coming up. and really have nothing except to say it's a restatement of law and appreciate it. Now yield back.
I appreciate it as well, and I think I'm glad you seem more comforted by the Attorney General's confirmation hearings than I do when it comes to releasing all the Mueller report. But anyway, I hope you're right. Mr. Hastings?
Just to follow on with what my good friend, thank you, Jim, Mr. Cole said earlier, and I am looking for his quote that I wrote down, that this particular resolution doesn't accomplish anything. You know, we are big-time politicians here in Washington, and on both sides of the aisle, it becomes important for us to inform the American public. Most times when things like this, and there have been times when I have been in the position that my good friend from Oklahoma has been in, when I said we aren't doing very much of anything, and the party on the other side wanted the American public to know something and to know how they felt about something. We up here refer to it as messaging. I'm referring to it as that. That is not what I believe the party itself is. I see it as an important message for the reason that all of, and I'm not one that likes or believes in nor have ever had a poll conducted on my behalf. I'm not a great believer in snapshots at a point in time. But all of the polling reflects that the American public wants to see what it can that is not classified and not grand jury or subject to ongoing investigations, all of those particulars. The American public really wants to see what Mueller has done. And I ask any of you that are congresspersons here, how often when you're in your district or on the phone talking with a constituent and they ask you about health care or any other matter. I was walking in here and a Republican colleague of mine was clustered with a group of members, and I walked up and shook his hand and whatever, and I was walking away. I heard a lady say, well, what about the Mueller report? You know, and that's just 20 minutes ago. So almost all of us have people ask us what's going to happen with the Mueller report. Well, this particular resolution goes on record saying precisely that we believe that to the extent that it can be made public, that it should be made public. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I feel it pretty egregious, and I believe most people in this country believe that Russia did something wrong. And that's a part of why Mueller was given his remit. And whatever that was wrong affected our election in a variety of ways: disinformation, misinformation, employing all sorts of bots during the course of the election. And remember now, 12 Russians have been indicted. They probably will never see the light of day in an American court, but they have been indicted, meaning that there was a trail to what they did. I want to know what Mueller has to say about that. I want to know what he has to say about the people he indicted. I want to know about what he has to say about the people that he declined to indict. And I think most Americans have that same feeling. And I'm not talking about Democrat or Republican here. And I note that my good friend from Georgia met with the Attorney General. I didn't have the good fortune to be with him when he met with the Attorney General. Otherwise, I would have asked the Attorney General to give me an indication as to how he intends to handle his remit as it pertains to this investigation. And I won't bother to quote what you said, Doug, but it didn't sound promising to me that Mr. Barr was getting ready to be revelatory with reference to whatever and whenever. And I wish really wish people would, particularly in the media, just wait a minute. Mueller will issue a report that is his remit. It may or it may not happen at a given time. But a week ago, we were all spun up. It was going to be out Friday. This past Thursday, it was going to be out Friday. Now we're talking about what is happening this week that may give us a lead on. It ain't going to give us anything. Mueller has played his cards close to the vest, as rightly he should. And the simple fact of the matter is there will come a day when he will issue a report. And I simply believe that this resolution helps the American public understand that we as Democrats want to be assured that they are going to receive as much of the Mueller information as is possible. And I would hope that that message is carried back to Mr. Barr and that he doesn't give us some snapshot summary of whatever it is that Mueller does, whatever he does, whenever he does it. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Thank you very much. There's not a great deal in what my friend had to say that I would disagree with. I've been on record repeatedly that this, as soon as they can get something done, that, again, obviously, and nobody at this dais would want anybody's, any intelligence technique or assets to be exposed. That's not the intent here, but this ought to be as complete and as thorough and as open as possible. I might disagree slightly with my friend. I'd be careful about mentioning people that weren't indicted or accused of a crime. That's usually the way the authorities. I certainly yield to my friend. Well, no, it's to reclaim my time, usually if you're having an investigation, if you don't charge somebody with something, you don't mention it. That's just the way the authorities. As a matter of fact, I think we probably both agree that too bad that Mr. Comey didn't follow that dictate in the last presidential election. So, I mean, that's the only caveat I have. But other than that, everybody else. Now, I suppose the weight of opinion is worth something. This is a non-binding resolution. It's not going to force him. But I take the Attorney General as word. He said repeatedly under oath in front of the United States Senate when he was being considered that he was going to be as forthcoming as he possibly could. He spoke of his high personal regard for Mr. Mueller and their long working relationship. So, and for that matter, the administration for certainly not happy about the Mueller probe, but they had never ended it. The president's never acted to stop it, nor has anybody in the administration. So I think I do agree with my friend. I think the report will come, and I think we'll get there. And I guess I wish we were doing something else this week that was substantive other than just this. But again, there's nothing that either of my friends said at the panel that I disagree with, nothing that my chairman has said, nothing that my good friend, the vice chairman, has said that I disagree with. So I suspect that'll be reflected on the floor. I think you'll get a very strong vote that as much as possible ought to be open. So with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And I think if that's the case, it'll be a very powerful statement. Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to both of you for being here. I am truly looking forward to passing this on a bipartisan level. As you stated, there is nothing here but to say it's a sense of Congress. Nothing more than what we do when we recommit ourselves to ethics, when we recommit ourselves to doing something. And I think getting ahead of that, as we mark Sunshine Week this week, and the weather outside is participating in the Sunshine Week because it's 60 degrees outside, much cooler here than in my home state of California, by the way. Congress must commit to the American people that we are truly for transparency and that we truly want to be not just as transparent as we can be, but ensure that they have the correct information in front of them. But the Trump administration appears, to be terrified of this report. And because of that, of those comments, of those tweets, that, by the way, I hope someone is keeping track of all of that because, you know, E for evidence, right? I think it's important for us to go on record to ensure that the American people knows that we are committed to this transparency. And I want to remind members that withholding information is the same thing as lying. So we don't want to withhold information and lie to the American public about what may or may not be in this report. So it's important for us to recommit ourselves, and it's important for us to vote for this HCON Res 24 in a bipartisan way. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr.
Mr. Chairman, could I just make a
sorry,
comment?
Mr.
And I, again, appreciate the gentlelady I have no, but I do want to just make one comment there that withholding equals lying. Classified information that would be withheld would not be lying. And 6E information that historically both Democrat and Republican, and we're both clear on that, and I just want to make that statement. I think that's what you meant, but I just wanted to clarify that is what we're going for, because that wouldn't be something I think either one of us would agree probably should be in a public setting.
Is that a signal that this report may be a classified report ultimately?
I'm sure that there's probably classified information in there that will probably, you know, that would have been used to get there. That has been, you know, true as we go forward. But that was just the only question. Other than that, you and I agree completely. I yield back.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Woodall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The resolution recognizes exactly what Mr. Collins has said. I think the most disappointing thing to me is that we're talking about this as if this is some divisive issue. And my friend, Mr. Hastings, who I believe to be one of the most inclusive people in this institution, he's always been a friend to me, said he thought this resolution was important because he wanted America to know what Democrats thought. I think most resolutions in the House are important because it's important for the folks to know what we all think. Now, somebody wins and somebody loses, and the majority party gets to set that agenda. But in 5 pages of findings, we don't talk about classified information. But when we get down to the 8 lines of actual substance in the legislation, it says release it to the extent that public disclosure is expressly prohibited by law, recognizes that things are prohibited by law, and to begin this drumbeat to say if things are classified, if there are things that are grand jury testimony and cannot be released, that somehow there's something untoward is going on, I think undermines the trust that I believe my chairman in good faith is trying to create with this resolution. I think there is a legitimate amount of skepticism in the country today about transparency. Probably they would expect more than a restatement of current law to happen during Transparency Week and Sunshine Week here. But I hope that this will be an opportunity for us to make it clear that there are things that cannot be released, but to the extent possible, and I can quote all of the Attorney General's statement saying he wants to release it to the full extent possible. This is not something that needs to divide us. This is something that could absolutely unite us. And to Mr. Collins' point, perhaps the slower legislative week this week, Mr. Collins will allow for more of those committee hearings to take place and markups to take place. The majority has made a commitment to doing more of that. We only got 1 out of 10 committees looking at H.R. 1, but I think the clock ticks out at the end of March for when bills will only come to this committee after hearings and markups. The new rules are going into effect soon here, and what the chairman has led on and we all desire will soon be a reality. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Let me just say, and I appreciate the gentleman's comments, and obviously I appreciate the comments of Mr. Collins as well. But I do think I hope this is a really strong bipartisan vote. I think that is, you know, I think that would show that there's, you know, unanimity when it comes to this issue, and I think that's very, very important. None of us know what's going to be in the report. We all want to make sure we're protecting sources and classified information, but I think if there's a strong bipartisan vote, you know what? I think that's a good signal for not only on this issue, but for the American people to see that we actually can agree on something. You know, you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something. If we agree on this, that's a good thing. Mr. Perlmutter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony today. Just quickly, for me, you know, speaking as the representative of the suburbs of Denver, you know, the fact we've got 1 conviction, 7 guilty pleas, 34 people and 3 companies indicted, and then a whole range of kind of investigations that may exonerate individuals or implicate individuals. I think this is an important resolution. I appreciate the bipartisanship you two are exhibiting today, so that all of us, no matter what it is that comes out in that report, have a chance to look at it, think about it, digest it. And, you know, these investigations have been swirling around. You know, the president has been, you know, his name has been either sullied or implicated appropriately. And I think this report will be good for all of us to see. And I appreciate the gentleman for bringing it forward, and I look forward to voting for it in this committee and on the floor. With that, I yield back.
Dr. Burgess.
Thank you, Mr. Hastings. I'm reminded of the words of another physician who was in the House of Representatives when I started here, who was on actually your side of the ledger, Dr. McDermott of Washington State. And when Republicans had put forward a sense of Congress resolution on something or another, he was quite derisive of our efforts and said, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, this is tantamount to sending a get-well card to the agency in question. So I would just offer that as words of former Representative McDermott of Washington State, and I think he may have been on to something. You know, earlier today, I think the Speaker of the House talking about impeachment, and let's be honest, that's what we're talking about here. You're hoping that the Mueller report will have delivered to you sufficient grounds to proceed with your impeachment hearings in your committee. Speaker Pelosi earlier today said that impeachment is just too divisive and President Trump is not worth it. So, okay, that's interesting. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Nadler is not here, but according to the New York Times last week, I guess Mr. Nadler is worried that the Mueller report won't have in it what he's originally expecting to see in the Mueller report, because he sent out 81 letters a week ago today sketching out a sweeping new inquiry. And he includes in those 81 government agencies, presidential advisors, Trump business and political associates, the Trump Organization, the Trump campaign, and the inaugural committee. Of course, many of these are private citizens, and they now are swept up in this 81 requests for information. They've all got to go out and hire lawyers and at their own expense. So this is not something that I think should be done lightly. But again, I think it comes back to the Judiciary Committee, particularly the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, who has said in previous recitations that he is planning to proceed with impeachment. Now, notwithstanding what the speaker said today, that perhaps there's a disagreement there, but
sir, if I may.
Let me finish, please.
Sure, sure.
Nevertheless, you're going forward with 81 separate investigations to various people. And again, I would just point out to you that those are all, some of those are just folks, they're not of large political presence. They're smaller players in this whole drama, but still, they are going to have to go out and hire legal counsel, and it is with some expense that they are going to possibly come before your staff of your committee or before your committee, and they've seen evidence of how people are treated, and they are justifiably concerned. Now, I share that concern because it was in your committee, the Judiciary Committee, on February 26th, one of the Democratic members, Representative Deutsch, mischaracterized the work being done by the Department of Health and Human Services to care for unaccompanied alien children by stating that the Office of Refugee Resettlement created an environment of systemic sexual assaults by HHS staff and on unaccompanied alien children. But this accusation was absolutely false. To my knowledge, I don't know that Representative Deutsch has ever visited an ORR facility. I know I have, at least 10 times. His comments discredit the effort by ORR employees to deal with a problem that was created not in this administration, but previous administrations, when the care of unaccompanied alien children came within the purview of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Look, if you don't like the work that ORR is doing, then you are in the majority and you're the appropriate committee that could change that authority. Following the claims by Representative Deutsch, Acting ORR Director Jonathan Hayes sent a letter detailing the facts of these sexual assault allegations and requested an apology from Representative Deutsch. To the best of my knowledge, he has not received that apology. And I am going to ask that the entire letter that was sent to Representative Deutsch be entered into the record, but I do want to read a portion of it because I think it's instructive. And this is a letter from Jonathan Hayes to Representative Deutsch. Dear Representative Deutsch, at the February 26th House Judiciary Committee hearing, you stated that ORR created an environment of systemic sexual assaults by staff on unaccompanied alien children, and went on to conclude that you have seen thousands of cases of sexual assault. However, this is unsupported by the data that you provided, and none of the allegations involves HHS employees. By negligently mischaracterizing the data during a televised hearing, you impugned the integrity of hundreds of federal civil servants who, like Commander White, worked tirelessly to ensure the well-being of the nearly 50,000 unaccompanied alien children who they have been charged by federal law to protect. On behalf of these dedicated employees of the Department of Health and Human Services assigned to the Unaccompanied Alien Children Program, we request that you apologize to these career civil servants for your untoward and unfounded comments. Acknowledging that you were wrong is the moral, decent, and right thing to do. And the letter goes into more considerable detail. Unfortunately, Chairman Nadler is not here, but I hope you will take this information back to your chairman, and I do request that the individual who made these allegations against these dedicated federal employees, civil servants, provide the appropriate apology that Mr. Hayes has requested. And now I'll be happy to take the question that the gentleman from Tennessee had.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, Doctor, that I've kept very close attention to Mr. Nadler's statements on impeachment, and unfortunately, I have to tell you, he has never said he was for impeachment. He has specifically said he's not. He's just for oversight, for going down the road of letting the American public know what's happened during this administration. He has never said he was for impeachment. If he had, I would remember it well.
You apparently weren't on the Amtrak train, but nevertheless, I think the data that is being collected that Chairman Nadler is requesting, the fact that we're here talking about the Mueller report that has not even been released yet, I think points in a general direction. You may think that Russia did something wrong in the last election, but let's be honest, you think President Trump did something wrong, and that something wrong was that he won an election that none of you expected him to win.
Was that a hypothetical question? He may think that Russia did something wrong. Are you not agreeing to that?
Look, the point is that the reason people are upset with the president is that he won an election that you did not think he could win. And we've heard that over and over again. You thought he could win?
Sir, I didn't think he could win, but that's not why I'm upset with him. I'm upset with him because of what he said about people who are fine people on both sides in Charlottesville. I'm upset with him because of what he said about Muslim people. I'm upset with him about what he said about women. I'm upset with him with his policies concerning children and their opportunities. I'm upset with him for saying that he didn't think Putin wouldn't have lied about interfering with our elections. I'm upset with him for so many other reasons, not with the fact that he won the election. I'm upset with the way he has served as president.
And yet, in every election that I can recall since I came to Congress, people, your side, has talked about rebuilding the middle class, and doggone it, this individual has done more to rebuild the middle class than any presidency since I've been in office. And I'll go a little bit further. You detailed a litany of things that you don't like about the president. This is the first president that has signed major sickle cell legislation in decades. Major sickle cell. There's a major effort on the part of the FDA and NIH right now to deal with sickle cell in a way that it hasn't been dealt with in a long time. Danny Davis's bill. Through our subcommittee, through work on the floor, Danny Davis's sickle cell bill became law and was signed into law by this president. This president signed the first major attempt to try to bring some rationality to the way that maternal mortality is reported in this country so that we can begin to do something about it. I would argue that this president has been enormously successful in the things that he's undertaken. But that wasn't the purpose of this hearing and not the purpose of my questioning. The purpose of my questioning was for you to convey to your chairman that Mr. Deutsch owes the people at ORR an apology, and I would expect it to be delivered.
Mr. Burgess has the time, so you can respond to him, yes.
I would just like to, on behalf of the committee, the 81 entities or people who have had asked to give information have all given that information or some information to the Mueller investigation, to the Southern District of New York, or to some other particular agency that has looked into Russian interference with the election or the pertinent malefactors that have been involved. And so nobody we're not talking about any first involvement with the government. They probably all had attorneys, but they're just asking to give the material they've given to somebody else to us.
Again, I think it would be appropriate for the member of your committee to provide an apology to the Secretary of HHS and the Director of Office of Refugee Resettlement. And I hope to see that happen this week. If it does not, I'm prepared to press this further. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
And thank you. And let me just also state for the record, if anybody here has any question as to whether or not Russia interfered in the 2016 election, I'm happy to maybe organize for this committee a briefing with the heads of our intelligence agencies, because I think at this point that should no longer even be a question or hypothetical. I mean, it happened, and there's plenty of documentation, classified and unclassified, that's available for people. But if there's any question, we can get a meeting together in this committee. Mr. Raskin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I'm very much in support of House Congressional Resolution number 24. We live in a time of rising authoritarianism all over the world, whether it's Vladimir Putin in Russia, or Orban in Hungary, or Duterte in the Philippines, or Erdogan in Turkey, or MBS, the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia who murders journalists. Wherever we turn, we see democracy and freedom under attack. And I'm very glad that on an overwhelming bipartisan basis last week, we denounced the rise in anti-Semitism and racism in this country and all over the world. We voted overwhelmingly that this was a threat to democracy and to our constitutional values, because they are. Anti-Semitism and racism are the gateway to destruction of our democracy and democracies all over the world. Now, why do I raise that? Because that's the whole context in which we have a Mueller investigation, in the whole context in which Congress is about to express, I think on an overwhelming, I hope on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, that the Mueller report has got to be given to the American people. As the chairman says, our electoral process was the target of the greatest active measure disinformation and destabilization campaign in the history of Russia. And you can talk to any of our intelligence agencies about it, and I hope that the good gentleman from Texas would, if he needs further convincing. And there are many books about it now. There were millions and millions of dollars spent on a campaign to destabilize our election process. And that should be a matter of concern to all of us, regardless of whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Reform, nothing. You hate all the parties. It makes no difference. There was an effort to destabilize and undermine our national political sovereignty in 2016. So the way it was explained to me, actually, by a friend who's worked in the intelligence community was very clarifying for me. He said, look, Putin now is a garden variety autocrat, kleptocrat, despot, like many all over the world. He says that the loss of the Soviet Union, and of course he had been the chief of the KGB, but the loss of the Soviet Union was the greatest political catastrophe of the 20th century. Not what happened in World War II, not genocide or Holocaust or World War I, but the crumbling of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Okay, and he looks at America and he says, well, he can't beat us militarily. We outspend them, I don't know, 25-1 or whatever. He can't beat us economically because Russia is in ruins, but we are an economic powerhouse. He certainly can't beat us in terms of political and moral philosophy because the American people, despite everything we've gone through, are in love with our democracy and our constitutional values, and we're not going to trade it for anything else. And so what do they have? What's our Achilles heel? The internet. It's informational security, the security of our computer systems. And they arrange a campaign to conduct cyber espionage and sabotage at the DNC, to pull all those emails and give them to the friends at WikiLeaks to release those, to try to undermine one side in another country's political campaign. Then they try to conduct a campaign of sabotage directly into state election systems, and a lot of states' computer systems were hit directly. Mine was, and if you have any doubt about that, I will give you the phone number of the head of our Board of Elections who reported it when the Russian agents tried to get into Maryland's election system. And then, perhaps most perniciously, they conducted a campaign of propaganda through Facebook and Twitter and social media in order to inject poison into the American system. And so everybody who plays into the divisiveness and the polarization, everybody who tries to summon up hate for the other political party and other American citizens is playing right into Vladimir Putin's hands. That's exactly what Putin wanted. He wanted this group to hate that group, and that party to hate that party, and that group to hate that group. And look how well it's worked. Look where we are in America in 2019 in terms of social unity. They did that beautifully, didn't they? Their internet research agency, which employed hundreds of people to pump poison and propaganda into our system. So whether you think the president was actively complicit in this and involved in it, or you think he was completely innocent and knew nothing about it, or whether you think he was just one lucky guy, it's irrelevant. America needs to know what happened to us in the 2016 election so we can prevent it from happening again in the 2020 election, and after that, and so on. And so I just hope that we can maintain the kind of bipartisan unity, not unanimity, but the overwhelming bipartisan unity we had last week in denouncing anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, in saying we need the truth about what happened. Let's release the Mueller report. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you. Ms. Lesko.
And I do thank Mr. Cohen, Mr. Collins for their great work on this.
Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for both of Mr. Collins and Mr. Cohen. When I was studying up on this resolution, I was reading something from the past on why we have the regulations we do now on the special counsel. And it dates back to the Clinton Department of Justice, led by Janet Reno and Eric Holder, and they issued background information on the new regulations. And specifically, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it basically says, the principal source of the problems with the final report requirement as set forth in the Independent Counsel Act is the fact that the report typically has been made public, unlike the closing documentation of any other criminal investigation. This single fact both provides an incentive to over-investigate in order to avoid potential public criticism for not having turned over every stone, and creates potential harm to individual privacy interests of those people that have not been prosecuted. So in the resolution, it says that everything has to be turned over for public release except which is expressly prohibited by law. And so my question to both of you is, I'm trying to determine if expressly prohibited by law includes if somebody is listed in this report that has been found to have done nothing wrong, would their names and information be released?
Okay, all right.
If you want, I suspect that they would be released in that he's supposed to give everybody who he indicts, which would be people who did wrong and who he decided not to indict, declinations also. So there'd be people that he would want to put out their names that they did nothing wrong. But I do think there's a distinction, and it may be somewhere where you're leading to, and that's the issue of somebody who's not indicted, not because they didn't do anything wrong, but because they're the President of the United States and the Justice Department policy is not to indict a sitting president. And that's a policy that might have good not to release information from somebody who's not indicted when they're not the president, and the reason they can't be indicted is because of the fact that they are the president. But the remedy the Founding Fathers put out for a president who committed improper conduct was impeachment, and if that is information that would lead the Congress to look at that, the Congress should make that determination and see that information. Otherwise, it's a catch-22 that even Yossarian would not approve of.
I think the gentlelady raises a valid point. I think the interesting part here is strict reading of the regulation. It goes back, you brought up a wonderful point here. It goes back to the fiasco that was the Starr report. And I think this is really just trying, and the Department of Justice under Janet Reno at that point said, we got to figure out a way to actually get to what was being investigated, report what was investigated in a proper and right format. And I think that's what's going to be followed here. That's why I feel that this resolution simply restates that, and I think would protect that. And going forward, what was public, conversations with the new Attorney General and his confirmation hearings confirmed that as well. So that's why I see this as simply a restatement of law. That a non-binding resolution from Congress is not going to change.
And thank you both for your answer. Yeah, I just thought that these were most, I read it from the past it was 1999 when it was obviously under the Clinton presidency, Janet Reno and Eric Holder, and they both, from what I read, it seemed like before all these reports were released to the public, and then they recommended just a summary be given to the Attorney General for two reasons. One was because they thought if everything is always released to the public, there'll be over-investigation because the investigators would worry that they were going to be criticized if they didn't turn over every stone. And the other reason is that it would identify people that were not indicted or didn't have, which is not what happens in other court proceedings. So I think it's a valid concern. So we'll see what happens if you think Attorney General Barr will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scanlon.
Yes, I'm pleased that there appears to be bipartisan support for as complete a release of the Mueller report as is possible. I would hope that going forward that there will also be bipartisan support for the other oversight measures undertaken by judiciary in order to either disprove or prove many of the elements of the culture of corruption that appears to have surrounded the campaign and inaugural funds of the Trump campaign and inaugural funds, if not the president himself. So I look forward to that.
Mr. Morelli. Ms. Shalala.
Another bipartisan bill that I hesitate to say anything. But let me simply say that a special counsel is really the most independent investigator the government can have because the government is not doing the investigating. So I strongly support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sonia.
I just want to thank Mr. Cohen and Mr. Collins for bringing us together in this manner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
Just like to add one thing for clarification. We've only had one other special counsel, and that was in Waco. Ken Starr was an independent counsel, didn't come under the statute, and it's a whole different set of procedures and rules.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. There are no further questions, and you guys are free to go. Thank you very much. Does any other member of the committee? Well, there was no one had any other questions. So I want to thank our witnesses for being here. And are there any other members who wish to testify on this? Seeing none, this now closes the hearing portion of our meeting. Yeah. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from Mr. DeSagne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H. Con Res 24, expressing the sense of Congress that the report of Special Counsel Mueller should be made available to the public and to Congress, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution. The rule provides that the amendments to the concurrent resolution and the preamble printed in the Rules Committee report shall be considered as adopted, and the concurrent resolution as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the concurrent resolution as amended. Section 2 of the rule provides that on any legislative day during the period from March 15, 2019 through March 22, 2019, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved, and the chair may at any time declare the House adjourned to meet at a date and time to be announced by the chair in declaring the adjournment. Section 3 of the rule provides that the Speaker may appoint members to perform the duties of the chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 2.
Thank you. And as we just heard from the gentleman from California, this rule provides for consideration of H. Con Res 24, a resolution expressing the sense of Congress that the report of Special Counsel Mueller should be made available to the public and to Congress under a closed rule. This rule self-executes 2 amendments that simply clarify that the resolution is calling for the release of the Special Counsel's findings, as was the case in the previous release of reports under the Special Counsel regulations, by adding the phrase, including findings. So you've heard the motion from the gentleman from California. Is there any amendment or discussion? Hearing none, the vote is now on the motion of the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. And Mr. DeSagne will be carrying this for the majority. And that is it. So, closes the hearing.
What do you do with all this extra time?
There you go. Get out of here Thursday. You know what? They
lost it. Unless there was a change. You different bags. A lot of my bag is snacks or anything. Unless something bounced back. Go without it.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live every day with